Welcome everyone to our Packers News free agency live stream alongside Pete Dougherty. I am Olivia Reiner. As you can tell, there is a pretty healthy distance in between the two of us today in light of COVID-19. Hopefully, wherever you are safe and healthy as well. The Packers reportedly made a pretty big splash today in free agency, signing inside linebacker from the Browns, Christian Kirksey, and right tackle from the Detroit Lions, Rick Wagner. We will start with Kirksey. He reportedly has a 2-year, $16 million deal here in Green Bay. However, he only has a $4 million cap hit in 2020. How team-friendly of a deal is this for the Packers?
Yeah, and by the count that I had looking at a report by Aaron Wilson from the Houston Chronicle, it looks like he's getting $6 million in cash this year. So overall, I'd say it's a little high for a guy with that injury history, but it's not terrible. The $4 million cap number is really manageable. This could easily turn out to be a one-year deal. I kind of see both of these signings as what you might have guessed going into it all. You might not have guessed that they'd do this part first, but that they needed basically a veteran at right tackle and a veteran at inside linebacker to be possible starters if they don't get rookies who are ready to start at those positions. And that's what they did. That's what you see Kirksey as. He's a little higher paid, that $6 million cash. It's not anything to, just dismiss. And you've got to think Mike Pettin must have had a big influence in this decision, right? He was with the Browns when he was the head coach when they drafted this guy, and for the Kirksey's first 2 years in the league.
Kirksey is set to enter his 7th season in the NFL. However, over the last 2 seasons, he's only played 9 games. Pete, how concerned should the Packers be about his injury history?
I'd be really concerned, and this goes against the signings last year, where all 4 of those guys, but especially the 3 most expensive ones, had really good injury histories. So this guy is a hair older, and he's had missing that many games the last 2 years. I think it was hamstring injuries both years, plus a chest injury also last year. It does make you wonder how well he'll hold up. So there's some risks there. It sure looks like they must think he's at least as good a player as Martinez and Schobert, and they're probably getting him cheaper than those guys, but also taking on more injury risk based on his history.
Speaking of Blake Martinez, the free agent is set to hit the market on Wednesday. How does Martinez's style of play compare to Kirksey's?
I think they're a lot different. Kirksey's faster, 4.58 40. Martinez was 4.71. When I was texting back and forth with some scouts today, one of them said Kirksey's more a run and hit guy. Martinez is a little stouter. I mean, neither one of them's real big. I think Kirksey's probably better in coverage than Martinez, as Joe Schobert was, another free agent who some people thought the Packers might go after, was teammates with Kirksey in Cleveland. Now, Schobert only ran 4.74, which is actually the slowest of the 3, but he's a better cover guy than Martinez, and one of the scouts I was texting with said basically, 6 and one, half dozen the other between Kirksey and Schobert as far as cover ability, even though Kirksey's the faster player.
Let's move on to right tackle Rick Wagner. He is a Wisconsin native, a former Wisconsin Badger. He reportedly comes to Green Bay on a 2-year, $11 million deal. His cap hit in 2020 is reportedly $4.8 million. Given his salary information, Pete, how likely is it that he is the starter in 2020?
So I don't know what you're thinking. My guess is, like, if you had to put a bet down, you'd bet on him being the starter. But I don't, if they end up drafting the tackle, you can't rule out the first round. If they did it in the first couple, if they take a tackle in the first couple rounds, I mean, think of how well Elton Jenkins played this year at guard. I don't know. I'd say it's maybe similar. It could end up being similar to the Lane Taylor situation, where maybe he's the starter, maybe not. I would just guess, 67% chance that he'd be the starter and 33% that he's not, somewhere in there.
Right tackle Brian Bulaga is set to become a free agent on Wednesday. Pete, how would you compare the 2 right tackles?
Bulaga, and I was texting with an offensive line. That's the one thing. All these guys in the league, they got nothing going either. So I was texting like mad with people, and they're actually hearing back from them. One of an offensive line coach in the league who looked at these guys in free agency a couple of years ago also thought that Bulaga's, even in their primes, Bulaga was much better. Even now, Bulaga's the better player, better pass protector. That's the big thing, for a team. Wagner probably run blocks just as well, but he comes a lot cheaper, and I get why the Packers would do it, and I understand. I think the decision is probably the right one to let Bulaga walk rather than pay $12 million and invest, $20 million guaranteed or whatever it's going to be. Better a year early than a year late, all that stuff. But if you're going to save the money, then you've also got to use it wisely. So it still depends on what they do with the savings.
Pete, let's take a step back and take a look at free agency through a bigger lens. At the Combine, Brian Gutekunst said that he doesn't think he'll be able to make as big of a splash in free agency as he did last year when he added outside linebackers Za'Darius and Preston Smith, safety Adrian Amos, and right guard Billy Turner. How many more signings do you anticipate Brian Gutekunst making this free agency?
It depends the approach he takes. Now, if you think of last year, even with Za'Darius Smith, who's averaging $16.5 million, his first year cap figure was only $7.5 million. Preston Smith is making $14 million, I think. His first year cap number was $6 million. So there are ways to, they got a lot of room to work with here if they want to. I'm still thinking they could spend they can spend really big on one guy at least, maybe even a second guy. Now, if the price is just get too rich for them, they didn't last year with Smith, but maybe, with whoever they're going after now, it was too rich on Hooper, for instance, for him. Maybe they decide to go and sign a bunch of mid-level guys instead. So maybe they'll sign, 4 more guys at cheaper prices, or maybe they'll just sign one big contract and that'll be just about it.
So the Packers are going to be in need of a tight end. They only have 2 tight ends currently signed to the roster, including Jace Sternberger and Evan Bayless. We've got someone like Robert Tonyan. He is an exclusive rights free agent this offseason. How likely do you think it is that the Packers make a run at a tight end in free agency?
Just guessing like we all are. I still think that they're going to sign a veteran, I would think. I wonder if they'll make a run at Eric Ebron now. He's had one really good year, but he's had a lot of very unproductive years too. So I would think his price would be cheaper. Maybe they'll find that palatable for a guy who's got a lot of talent and who had 13 touchdown catches a couple of years ago playing with Andrew Luck. That's the guy who leaps to mind. There's a lot of other players available who could come in and just be bit rotational players, maybe someone who's a little more blocking oriented because Sternberger and Tonyan are more receiver types. But I'm guessing that they'll still sign somebody. Don't know that. But if I had to put a bet down, I'd bet on them signing somebody in free agency.
We'll see what Brian Gutekunst decides to do at the tight end position this offseason. Everyone, thank you for your patience in the comments. I will get to some of those questions you have right now. Brian wants to know, any chance the Packers sign Amari Cooper or Stephon Diggs? Cooper with the Cowboys, wide receiver, is set to become a free agent. Stephon Diggs over at the Vikings has taken to Twitter to express that he wants to leave Minnesota. Yeah. How likely is it that the Packers express interest in either of them?
I don't know, but that's actually some of the stuff I'm working on a column, not as we speak, but before and after. And I would think at least a chance on Cooper. Now he's going to be really expensive because if you make actually he's a free agent, so it's going to be, it's going to be up there. But he's young enough where I wouldn't be shocked if Gutekunst made a run at him. Diggs really jumps out because he could be a slot receiver. It would fit pretty well there, Mike. But that would have to be a trade because he's still under contract with the Vikings. And teams generally are really reluctant to trade pretty good players to division opponents. So odds would be against that, but you never know. Maybe the thinking for some teams has changed and they think, if that's the best trade you can get, why not do it?
Certainly the Packers will be looking to acquire a wide receiver, whether it's through free agency or in the draft with a very deep draft class. Let's see, we've got a question here from Jim. Any word on Packers free agent right tackle Jared Valdir? He stepped up in place of Brian Bulaga this past season in 2 games. He started in the game against the Seattle Seahawks when Brian Bulaga was sick. He didn't allow any sacks. He didn't have any penalties. How likely is it that Brian Gutekunst attempts to bring back Jared Beldier?
I'm guessing probably, especially after signing Wagner, probably not real good. Again, the guy was that ended up being a really nice midseason signing last year. He helped them win 2 games. But he's really, really beat up. I mean, the Patriots signed him last year to be their left tackle, and he retired like a couple days into training camp because of these chronic hip problems that he's having. Now, he got through last year, but I was talking during the season, actually, or just after, with an offensive line coach with another team, and he said, I worked a guy out a couple of years ago. We had him in for a workout, and even a couple of years ago, he was looking pretty creaky, and he said, he can get by just fine for a game or a couple games, but if you have to start him, 4 or 5 weeks in a row, he just has serious doubts about whether the guy's body will hold up. I mean, you never know, but especially after signing Wagner, though, I'm guessing Beldier, that's unlikely.
No decision yet on Beldier. We'll see. Brian wants to know, who do the Packers put beside Kenny Clark next season? Packers tried having Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster, Montravius Adams, all defensive linemen. However, the Packers struggled to stop the run this past season. Who do you anticipate the Packers bringing in the offseason, whether it's in draft or through free agency?
The list of the free agent, because this would be a run stopper type guy, kind of a cheap guy, inexpensive. The list was so long, there's so many choices, and some guys have gotten cut too, that I'd just be pulling names out of thin air and guessing. But I've got to think that they're going to try to sign a guy for anywhere from, $2 to $4 million to maybe $5 million to play, maybe something similar to the Wagner deal, although that's getting a little higher. But just someone to play the early downs, to be a really good run stopper. They just cannot have what happened at San Francisco, anything like that. And the run defense was an issue on and off all season. Again, if you were guessing going into free agency, I was thinking they would sign the stopgap inside linebacker, right tackle, and run stopper. So that one could be to come. These 2 guys signed because I think they had already been released, so they could sign before free agency started. Whereas some of these guys, now those dominoes may not fall for a few days or even a week or so.
Potentially some holes for the Packers to fill along the defensive line in the offseason. Something we discussed earlier in our show were the tight ends. And Donnie wants to know, will the Packers re-sign veteran tight end Marcedes Lewis, who is a free agent? The Packers, like I mentioned earlier, only have 2 tight ends technically signed to the roster at this point. How likely is it that Marcedes Lewis returns?
Do you think it's over or under 50-50?
It's difficult considering the role that he played on this team. His ability to block in this offense, I think, has been very crucial for the Packers. And as a locker room guy, big dog, gets a lot of shout outs. Yeah. So it's a tough call.
It is, and he, not that he'll be expensive, but he cost a little over $2 million last year, I think. He's getting up there. I mean, he's 36? Is that right? I think that's right. I guess if I had to bet, I would bet that they'll move on, but maybe they go through, make a run at a couple other free agents, and they don't want to pay what other teams are willing to pay for those guys, and so maybe they bring Lewis back, and they're just keeping that on the back burner for now. If I had to guess, I'd guess against it, but with a very low confidence level in that guess.
We'll see what they end up doing there. At tight end, Todd wants to say, not a question, he has a statement. He wants to see the Packers move up for CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver in the draft. How likely is it that the Packers would move up for a receiver in this year's draft?
Without knowing what they think about any particular guy, and even though this is a deep class with receivers, everybody says it, there still could be a guy, maybe they just are blown away by CeeDee Lamb. So then maybe they move up and get it. if you're playing percentages and just outside looking in, you would think they wouldn't trade up for a receiver because there's so many that they could get a prospect they really liked, either sitting where they were or trading back early into the second round, or even waiting until their real pick in the second round, late in the second round, to make the pick. So I would bet against a trade up for a receiver, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't do it. I would just guess that they would not.
Mm-hmm. Considering that, and considering what we discussed earlier about the offensive line, with the Packers bringing on a new face in Rick Wagner as potentially what could be the starting right tackle, who else on the Packers roster currently could possibly start at right tackle and beat out Wagner?
You know, they haven't cut Lane Taylor yet, which they could save. I think it's, $3 or $4 million on the cap if they did. And they would have thought if they were going to do it, they maybe would have done it before the league year started. So that makes you wonder if they're still kicking around the idea of moving Elton Jenkins or Billy Turner out there. Both have played right tackle in the past, Turner in the NFL, Jenkins in college. I would think those would be the only two guys, and I'm still not sure I would want to move either one, since they played all last year at guard, and Jenkins, I'm sure he could play out there and do okay, but he looks like he's going to be such a good guard. Why weaken yourself at two spots? That's the thinking a lot of times with NFL teams and moving offensive linemen. So there are possibilities. The signing of Wagner makes you think that they're probably not going to do that, but you never know what they're thinking. A friend of mine who was in this business for a long time told me that years ago, George Young, who was the GM for the Giants, I think in the 70s and 80s, he once told them, whatever you're thinking, he was talking whatever, the media who follow this closely, whatever you're thinking, we're probably thinking the opposite. And I think it turns out that there's often a lot of truth in that.
A lot of questions still to be answered for the Packers this offseason. We will find out what Brian Gutekunst decides to do as free agency officially begins on Wednesday, and the draft, well, hopefully, as the NFL did announce today, it will continue on in April. However, it will not be open to the fans as it typically has been as a fan event in the past. Thank you all very much for joining us. We appreciate it. Make sure you're following us over on our social media channels, Packers News, all over the place, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Stay in touch as the NFL league year continues, as it typically does. Please, everybody, stay safe out there.